In the early hours of February 3, 2003, the lights inside a lonely mansion flickered against the California night. To the outside world, the home was known as the Pyrenees Castle, a lavish fortress perched in Alhambra. But on that night, it became something far darker, a place where the paths of two very different lives collided, and only one of them would leave alive. The name Lana Clarkson was about to be etched into crime history, not as the actress she had once dreamed of becoming, but as the victim in one of Hollywood's most shocking murders. To understand how Lana found herself walking into that castle, one must begin years earlier, when her life seemed destined for stardom. Born in 1962 in Southern California, she grew up in a world of sun and possibility, a blonde girl with ambition and beauty, someone who wanted to carve out a name for herself in an industry that chewed people up just as easily as it elevated them. By the early 1980s, Lana had achieved what many young actresses only dream of. She was cast in roles that made her a cult figure. Films like Barbarian Queen gave her recognition, and she became known for portraying strong warrior women, fighters in leather and steel who stood their ground. At conventions and in fan circles, she was adored. But Hollywood is fickle. For every rising star, there are 10 fading into obscurity. As the years passed, roles for women like Lana, tall, striking, now edging past her 30s, became scarce. By the dawn of the new millennium, her career had slowed to a crawl. She made appearances, did small projects, but it wasn't enough to live on. Like so many actors whose fame had slipped just out of reach, Lana had to find other work. She took a job as a hostess at the House of Blues on Sunset Boulevard. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept her close to the world she loved, the nightlife, the music, the pulse of Hollywood. It was there, inside the House of Blues, on the night of February 2nd, 2003, that Lana Clarkson crossed paths with a man whose shadow loomed over music history. His name was Phil Spector. To describe Phil Spector is to describe a contradiction. On one hand, he was a genius, a revolutionary music producer who invented the wall of sound, a recording technique that layered instruments and created a thunderous, sweeping effect that transformed pop music in the 1960s. He worked with legends, the Ronettes, the Righteous Brothers, the Beatles. His influence was undeniable. Artists spoke his name with reverence. He was a man who, for a time, controlled the very sound of an era. But behind that genius lay a darkness. Those who knew Spector described him as erratic, paranoid, and obsessed with control. He was eccentric to the point of being dangerous. He rarely appeared without wigs or bizarre outfits, as if hiding behind masks of his own making. And then there were the guns. Everyone who had spent enough time around him had a story. The way he would wave a pistol in drunken anger, the threats, the sudden bursts of violence. Women especially bore the brunt of his unpredictable moods. Former companions recalled how he could turn from charming to terrifying in an instant. The power that had made him a legend in the studio also seemed to drive him toward destruction in his personal life. By 2003, Spector's brilliance belonged to the past. His glory days in the music industry were long gone. He had retreated into his mansion, a bizarre fortress he called the Pyrenees Castle, and lived there in isolation. The house was filled with guns, odd decorations, and the lingering presence of a man who could not let go of power. In Hollywood, he was still a name, but a faded one, a recluse known more for his instability than his genius. On that February night, he arrived at the House of Blues, as he sometimes did, still craving the company of beautiful women who reminded him of his long-lost glory. There, standing at the entrance, was Lana Clarkson, greeting guests with her natural warmth and wit. She was 40 years old, still radiant, but not the ingenue Hollywood once adored. To Spector, she was someone new to lure into his strange orbit. Accounts from that night suggest that Spector fixated on her quickly. He struck up conversation, charmed her enough to persuade her to spend time with him after her shift. For Lana, perhaps it seemed harmless. She had no reason to suspect the danger hidden beneath his eccentric exterior. To her, he was just another music figure, another person of wealth and influence. When he invited her to come back to his mansion, she agreed. The drive from Sunset Boulevard to Alhambra was quiet, the city glowing in the distance as they made their way toward the looming silhouette of the Pyrenees Castle. Lana may have thought of it as an adventure, a chance to meet someone famous, maybe even to network, to keep a fragile connection to the world she still longed for. She could not have known that by stepping inside, she was walking into a trap she would never escape. The Pyrenees Castle was an unsettling place. Unlike the modern mansions of Hollywood Hills, it looked like something lifted out of a Gothic novel. Its stone walls, iron gates, and shadowed halls gave the air of isolation. Inside, the eccentricities of Phil Spector were everywhere. Strange artwork, clutter, and above all, the omnipresence of guns. Friends who visited recalled how firearms were never out of reach, how Spector's paranoia made him keep them close. What happened inside during those early morning hours remains the subject of speculation, testimony, and forensic science. But what is certain is this: by the time the sun began to rise on February 3rd, Lana Clarkson would be dead. A single gunshot would echo through the castle, shattering not just the silence, but 2 lives forever. Phil Spector would tell one story, investigators would find another, and the truth, buried in the twisted personality of a fallen legend, would drag on through years of trials, headlines, and courtroom battles. For now, all that can be seen is the image of a woman climbing into a car that night, believing she was heading toward nothing more than a harmless encounter, and a man whose demons were waiting for her at the end of the drive. The stage was set. The curtain was about to rise on a crime that Hollywood would never forget. The night of February 2nd, 2003 began like so many others in Los Angeles. Neon lights buzzing over Sunset Boulevard, laughter and music spilling from clubs, people chasing the next thrill. Inside the House of Blues, Lana Clarkson greeted guests with the kind of easy charm she was known for. She wore a smile, masking the reality that she was working a shift that had nothing to do with the career she once dreamed of. Somewhere between the bands and the bar, her path crossed with Phil Spector. Witnesses would later recall how Spector seemed to latch onto Lana quickly, insisting she join him for drinks. Lana, ever polite, didn't push him away, though she reportedly told friends she was tired, ready to go home. But Spector wasn't accustomed to hearing no. His wealth, his fame, though diminished, still gave him an aura that made refusal difficult. By the end of her shift, he persuaded her to leave with him. The drive from Sunset to Alhambra stretched nearly 40 minutes, long enough for the initial buzz of the night to fade into something heavier. Spector's chauffeur, Adriano de Souza, drove the black Mercedes as his employer sat beside Lana in the back. De Souza would later give testimony that Lana didn't seem especially eager, that she appeared hesitant, but she agreed, perhaps thinking it was harmless, perhaps curious about the strange, reclusive man sitting beside her. The Pyrenees Castle rose out of the darkness like a relic of another world. Surrounded by gates and stone walls, it felt cut off from the city, its isolation both grand and unsettling. De Souza pulled the car up to the entrance, and Lana followed Spector inside. The chauffeur remained outside, waiting. He would never forget the hours that followed. Inside, the night twisted into something grim. Neighbors and friends had long whispered about the strangeness of being in Spector's mansion. Guns on display, his erratic moods, the sense of unease that followed him. Lana would have encountered that eccentric environment firsthand. What words passed between them will never be fully known. But sometime between her arrival and the early morning, everything turned deadly. At 5 a.m., a shot rang out. The sound was sharp, echoing through the castle's halls. Outside in the car, Adriano de Souza sat up, startled. Moments later, he saw his employer step out of the front door, holding a pistol. According to the chauffeur, Spector muttered chilling words. "I think I killed somebody." De Souza, alarmed, immediately called 911. The dispatcher's recording captured his urgency, his thick accent struggling against the panic. Police rushed to the mansion, and when they arrived, the scene inside was devastating. Near the foyer, Lana Clarkson's body was slumped in a chair. Her purse still hung from her shoulder. She had been shot once in the mouth, the bullet exiting through the back of her head. The weapon, a .38 caliber revolver, lay on the floor near her feet. Her blood spattered the carpet, a violent end to what should have been an ordinary night. Phil Spector was taken into custody, but he insisted on a different version of events. He claimed Lana had been depressed, that she had taken his gun and killed herself. He told police it was a tragic accident, not a crime, but investigators weren't convinced. For one thing, the position of her body and the blood patterns didn't match a self-inflicted gunshot. For another, her friends and family denied any notion that Lana was suicidal. She had just landed new opportunities. She was making plans. She was looking forward, not back. As detectives combed through the mansion, a darker portrait of Phil Spector began to emerge. Witnesses came forward. Women who had once been with him told stories of nights when he waved guns in their faces, when his charm flipped into menace with terrifying speed. Former dates described being locked in his home, threatened if they tried to leave. Guns weren't an accessory for Spector. They were a weapon of control. Forensic experts studied the evidence carefully. The gunshot wound, the spatter, the fingerprints, all suggested that Lana had not held the weapon herself. The angle and trajectory pointed to someone else pulling the trigger at close range. And yet Spector's team insisted she had grown despondent, that perhaps humiliation over her faltering career had pushed her to end her life. It was a story convenient for him, but inconsistent with the facts. In the days that followed, the media swarmed. An actress murdered in the home of a music legend? It was a story that drew headlines around the world. Outside the castle, cameras clicked. Journalists pieced together the details. Who was Lana Clarkson, and why had her life ended in such a place, with such a man? For police, the immediate suspicion rested squarely on Phil Spector. The statement he made to his driver was damning. His history with firearms incriminating. He was charged with murder, though he would be released on bail soon after, retreating back into the bizarre cocoon of his mansion. But one thing was certain: this would not be a quick case. Spector was rich, powerful, and determined to fight. He hired a team of top lawyers. He wove his story of accident, of suicide, insisting he was not to blame. And yet, as investigators dug deeper, as witnesses came forward, a chilling pattern emerged. A pattern that suggested Lana Clarkson's death was not an isolated tragedy, but the final inevitable act in a long history of violence. The castle in Alhambra no longer seemed like a home. It was a crime scene, one that echoed with a single shot fired in the night. A shot that ended one life and exposed the dark side of another. As police carried Lana's body out into the dawn, cameras caught the image. A woman whose Hollywood dreams had ended not in the spotlight, but in silence, inside the home of a man who once believed he could control sound itself. And this was only the beginning. The courts, the trials, the testimonies, they would drag on for years. But on that February morning, all anyone knew was that a beautiful woman was dead, and the man once hailed as a genius now stood at the center of a murder investigation. The suspense was just beginning. The murder of Lana Clarkson did not end on that February morning. In many ways, it had only begun. What followed was years of courtroom drama, endless headlines, and the public dissection of a man who once shaped the sound of modern music. The trials of Phil Spector became as infamous as the crime itself, a story of genius consumed by madness, and a woman whose voice was silenced too soon. From the very beginning, Spector's legal team fought to frame the case as an accident, even a suicide. They painted Lana as a fading actress, someone supposedly depressed over her career. But prosecutors had something far stronger, a pattern of behavior stretching back decades. One by one, women stepped forward to testify. They told eerily similar stories. They described nights when Spector would invite them into his home, charm them with music and drinks, only for the evening to twist into something darker. Guns would appear, threats would be made, and they were often not allowed to leave until Spector had decided it was over. Some spoke of how he would wave pistols at them, forcing compliance through fear. Their words painted a chilling picture, not of a tragic accident, but of a man who used firearms as a weapon of control. The defense pushed back, trying to discredit these women, but the stories were too consistent. Jurors heard about a man whose temper was legendary, whose paranoia only grew with alcohol. They heard about his obsession with possession, his fear of being abandoned, and how he used violence to keep women near him. Lana Clarkson's death, they argued, was not an isolated event. It was the inevitable conclusion of a long, dangerous pattern. The first trial in 2007 ended in deadlock. The jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. Spector walked out of court, free for the moment, but his reputation was already in tatters. The public saw the wig-wearing recluse shuffling into court in bizarre outfits, and the once revered producer became an object of morbid fascination. The castle in Alhambra stood as a symbol of his decline, a fortress turned prison of his own making. But prosecutors did not give up. In 2009, the second trial began, this time with even more evidence, even more witnesses willing to speak about Spector's terrifying behavior. The jury listened to the chauffeur's account, those chilling words, "I think I killed somebody." They saw the forensic evidence that contradicted any claim of suicide, and they weighed the testimony of women who had lived through his gun-fueled rages. In April 2009, the verdict finally came. Phil Spector was found guilty of second-degree murder and of using a firearm in the commission of a crime. The sentence, 19 years to life in prison. The man who once ruled recording studios with unmatched vision was now reduced to an inmate in a California prison cell. His eccentric wigs, his strange persona, his endless denial, none of it mattered anymore. The music world had lost a pioneer long ago. What remained was a broken figure whose genius had been drowned by violence and obsession. As for Lana Clarkson, her story remained frozen in that February dawn. Friends remembered her not as the victim splashed across tabloids, but as the vibrant woman who made people laugh, who still dreamed of new opportunities even in her 40s, who once dressed as a warrior queen and believed in her power. Her mother spoke of a daughter who still had so much life left to live. Fans continued to honor her for the cult films she starred in, for the strength she brought to her roles. She was more than the woman whose life ended in the Pyrenees Castle. She was someone who deserved better. In January 2021, Phil Spector died behind bars, a lonely end to a life that had once commanded the world's attention. His death closed the final chapter of the story, but for many it was not justice. It was simply the inevitable end of a man who had long escaped accountability. The murder of Lana Clarkson is remembered as a Hollywood tragedy, but also as a lesson. Fame and genius can never excuse cruelty. Wealth and legacy cannot erase violence. At its heart, this was not just the story of a legendary music producer. It was the story of a woman who walked into a mansion one night and never came out again. And that is the story of Lana Clarkson and Phil Spector. How a chance meeting turned into a nightmare. How truth unraveled inside a courtroom. And how a man who once built a wall of sound could not silence the echoes of his own brutality. If you found this story haunting, make sure to like this video, share it with others who follow true crime, and subscribe for more deep dives into cases where family, fame, and darkness collide. Lana Clarkson's story reminds us that behind every headline is a human life, a dream cut short,